Sweet. Hello and welcome, everybody. Apologies for technical difficulties. We have decided to call it a day and record this for you instead. So if you're hearing this, thank you so much for opening the email. Thank you so much for following through on the ROI for SEO guides. We're hoping that this is going to be as useful as a webinar. And if you did submit a question, we're actually going to follow up on those at the end of this webinar. So hopefully you did have a chance to submit one, and hopefully we can answer your question. All right, so let's get started. We're going to be forecasting, calculating ROI for SEO today. I know we have a lot of experienced folk in the crowd. Some people are saying they're doing SEO for 20 years, so probably majority of the viewers know exactly what ROI stands for and SEO stands for. But for those who don't, ROI is return on investment, and SEO is search engine optimization. And we're basically combining the two. So we want to see how we can predict what we can get out from what we put in. And Genesee, next slide. Sweet. So for the agenda today, we're going to go over the importance of ROI for SEO, how we're going to be forecasting SEO ROI, how we measure it, and also how to calculate it once everything's all said and done. So after everything already happens, all the SEO is done, and we see the effects of SEO, it's very, very important to measure it. Next slide. Oh. Cool. Importance of ROI for SEO. Oh, here we go. We're having a bit of loading issues now. The importance of ROI for SEO, we're going to go over a couple of sections. First, what kind of types of SEO we're going to be doing, why SEO even matters for ROI, because ROI is obviously applying to way more marketing techniques than just SEO. The types of ROI we'll be talking about, because believe it or not, there's different kinds of ROI, and also how SEO will contribute to that eventual return on investment. First, types of SEO. And I know we have a lot of experienced people in the crowd, but for those who are just starting out, there's usually three pillars that people refer to: technical, on-page, and off-page. When we're speaking of technical SEO, we're usually talking of crawling, indexing, anything that involves the technological improvement of your site. So most times when you do technical SEO, you will be talking to a development team. You'll be improving things on the back end, things that a regular user probably wouldn't see and know about, but they do very much affect the SEO of your site. Secondly, on-page SEO. This is the things people will actually interact with, things that are on the page, and optimization of the actual content. And off-page usually refers to promotion of your site. For SEO specifically, it often comes in the form of links. A lot of times it's link building. A lot of times it's a PR campaign that eventually turns into a gaining of links, potentially fixing broken links. All those things are referred to off-page SEO. Sweet. Next slide. Oh, cool. We have a bit of a delay on slide changes, so no big deal, but just sit tight if there's a bit of a pause. And why do they all matter? Well, if you do it all correctly, it's going to have a huge impact on the bottom line. And ultimately, that's what we're after. We're trying to grow the business, grow the revenue, grow profits, potentially gain a larger market share, build a brand, all those great things that we talk about when we talk about marketing, especially digital marketing. This will all be impacted by a proper usage of techniques that contribute to SEO. Next slide. And there are a few revenue streams that SEO can impact, actually. Most times we'll think of SEO as impacting only organic traffic. That's actually not the case. Organic traffic is definitely super, super important for SEO, but ultimately we want to impact way more streams. We want to improve the overall experience, the overall site. And a lot of times if you do good SEO, other things will improve as well. And we'll go into that in a bit. Increased engagement. absolutely can be done with good SEO. If you're just doing SEO to hack your ranks and just to get a better position, you're probably stuck in the wrong decade. At this point, we want to increase the engagement as well. So once we get the users on the page, it's not enough for them to just click the link and be done with it. We ultimately want to engage the user. We want them to find value in what we're offering. And we also want them to eventually convert, whatever that may be. For some of us, conversions just means they look at multiple pages. We get revenue through ads. For some nonprofits, it doesn't even matter if there's any kind of revenue. We just want people exposed to information. A great example of that would be with all the PSAs and information being passed around about the most recent pandemic. If you're a government site, you don't really care if people convert, so to speak. You just want them to read as much information as possible to be in the know of how they could better protect themselves, how they could do things safely, how they should be behaving during lockdowns, things of that nature. So that's technically still ROI. It's still conversions, but it's a different mindset. Obviously, a lot of us in this call probably thinking e-commerce, thinking, well, how do I get someone to buy something? And that's probably the most clear-cut case of revenue. Next slide. And we also want to increase visibility. So even if we're not getting clicks, we are taking up real estate space in search engine results pages, SERPs. So even if someone's just taking the lion's share of all the clicks because they're ranked #1 and there's nothing you can do about it, a good example is like a Wikipedia. Like if it's an informational search, a lot of times you just can't do anything about the fact that Wikipedia will rank #1. Just because you don't get that click does not mean that your SEO efforts are pointless. Just appearing on the page is brand exposure. Think of a billboard, for example. If somebody sees your billboard, you don't know if they're eventually going to convert, but you do know that people will be exposed overall to your brand. And down the line, if you are top of mind, they could potentially convert later on. So same thing goes with a search. If you're just being there is already winning in a lot of instances. Next slide. And here's a great quote. The best place to hide a dead body is the second page of Google search. And I'll give you another one. Also, the first page of Bing. So basically, if you're not on page 1 of Google, you're not likely to be found, and you're not even getting visibility in most cases. So you definitely have to put the due diligence into your SEO program to appear in the right places, so people even have the opportunity to interact with your brand. If you're on page 2 of Google, most times that's not going to be the case, and you definitely need to improve. Next slide. And I did mention before that there's actually different types of ROI. And when I said that, I was talking about projected ROI and actual ROI. Projected ROI will often be a range of some sorts, or a very, very good guesstimate of where you're going to be with your return on investment. This will never be super accurate. And if it is, well, buy a lottery ticket because you just got really lucky. Actual ROI is what we measure when things actually happen. So post-fact, you did your great SEO, a few months passed, and now you're doing the actual work of measuring what happened. This is when you have factual information that proves whether something worked, didn't work, or had no effect. So ultimately, you want to compare the two and see if your projections came true. And if they did, you did an amazing job, and keep at it. And obviously, in this webinar, we want to go over how SEO will contribute to this ROI. We ultimately want to increase the quality of traffic, as well as increasing traffic itself. So what I mean by that is, like I said, it's not enough to just hack your rank and get people to click on your links in SERPs. That's ultimately not going to get you all the way there. You want people engaged, you want people to convert, and ultimately you want people to have their intent served. So if someone's looking for something in particular, tricking the algorithm into ranking your page when it shouldn't isn't really going to get you far. It's going to get you maybe traffic, but if that traffic is completely unqualified, you just have a nice number to report on. It's not really going to contribute to your ROI. It's not really going to contribute to your revenue. So it's very important to do that balancing act of quantity over quality. You don't just want unqualified traffic. If that's what you want, you could potentially click very cheap, pay very cheap services to do like click hacking, where they'll just click on your ads or click on your links, refresh your pages. You're going to get a ton of traffic, and none of that is going to be convert to anything. Next slide. Another way SEO should and could contribute to ROI is through optimization of user experience. That's something we're very adamant about at iPullRank. It's not enough just to build content for a search algorithm just to get it to rank. And I'm harking on this point a lot. We ultimately do have to care about the user and their experience and see how we could create a user journey where it's taking them on the most useful path possible, rather than just trying to get them on that page, whatever the page is, just to get that user on their site. We ultimately want them to get them on the right page and then push them in the right direction. So if someone's doing informational searches and we're serving them a product page, that's not a great user experience, nor will it convert, because if someone's still trying to research about a specific product, they're not really ready to buy. And you're basically trying to push that on them, and ultimately that doesn't really work at scale, and also it does not serve that intent. So you always have to be mindful of where the person is in that funnel, where they are in their journey, and have content that serves each piece of the puzzle. And UX definitely folds into that very neatly. If the user experience is great and they know exactly where everything is, they know where to click, you're going to see the engagement go up, you're going to see the pages per session go up, you're going to see conversions go up, and ultimately return on investment and the bottom line will improve. Cool. And like I said, there's the funnel, and we could think of this funnel as different touch points. So if we're going through these digital touch points, it doesn't make sense to try to serve the same content to someone in the awareness stage as someone in the loyalty stage. They're just in a different place in their journey. So thinking of these touch points is very, very important. And thinking of these touch points as not strictly a single channel is also extremely important. So when you're thinking of SEO, and I know a lot of us here on this call are specifically working on SEO, but guess what? People who search things on Google also have social media. They also have email. They also go visit your site directly. So thinking of SEO as a piece of the puzzle a lot of times is a great way to make sure that you're once again serving that intent at the right place and the right time, rather than just trying to push people through this funnel to get them to convert. And obviously, not everybody will know how to do this, but if you do have GA, a great section to look into is assisted conversions, where you can basically mix and match how the person ended up converting. So you could see how SEO helped conversions in social, for example. So someone found your site through search, and eventually they saw an ad on social media, they clicked the ad, they bought the product. Thinking of that is very, very important as well. We don't necessarily see someone find your product, be so in love with it, that they go through the whole entire funnel immediately there and then and buy. When it does happen, it's amazing, but most times it won't. Next slide. We also have to think of SEO helping other channels as well. So like I said, assisted conversions one way, but it also helps your PPC ads perform better as well. When you have a search result on the SERP and an ad on top of that, a lot of times those ads will perform better. And in the same way that the organic result will perform better. Having two results on the same page basically signals to users that you have an authoritative voice in whatever topic the person searched. So seeing it twice makes them more likely to click one of those two. Ultimately, you also have to weigh the pros and cons of having both. So if you're doing so great organically, maybe it's time to consider pausing that specific keyword in your PPC campaigns and see if you can if SEO picks up. But if you having both definitely helps both. Next slide.
I'm going to take over from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Genesee.
Thank you, Alex. All right, so just jumping in here. Hi, everyone. I'm Genesee. I'm just going to take you through the importance of forecasting ROI for SEO, how to develop these projections, and how we're going to communicate them. So forecasting ROI, as Alex mentioned, is very important for SEO. It gives you a general sense of how impactful investing in SEO is going to be for your company and whether or not it's worth it for your business. And the most exciting part for analytic nerds like me is just creating accountability when it comes to measuring things. So how do we develop these SEO projections? We have our annual SEO projections, which uses following formula. You're going to take CTR times incremental search volume times organic search conversion rate and multiply it again by average order value in order to get your projected incremental revenue from organic search. So it's a pretty simple calculation, but we're going to guide you through how to get to them. So in step 1, to get started, you're going to need to compile the data on historical performance from unbranded keywords for your site based on organic search, of course. So you're going to export from Google Search Console. And we recommend pulling data using the GSC API for greater accuracy. Since GSC gives us an average position value, we want to calculate a CTR curve. And we're going to need to round up these numbers that they provide us with to a full ranking value. And to do so, you would just create column F and use the formula equals round, open parentheses, E2, comma 0, close parentheses, and just fill it all the way down. And step 3, we're just going to create a pivot table with the rankings in rows and average CTR and values using our GSC data. So using rankings 1 through 10, we're going to make a table and create the CTR curve. This way we're able to visualize those numbers. And in step 5, you'll just need to identify the annual search volume for your keywords that don't rank in the top 10. From there, you're also going to need the conversion rate. And for most e-commerce sites, you'll want to include your average order value as well. So once you have these values, you'll multiply them to get the amount of potential traffic. And then from there, step 6, more multiplication. We're just going to multiply traffic by CTR to get the number of potential conversions.
Yeah, and Genesee, just for the few people who may not know, CTR is click-through rate. So this is a metric that you could get from Google Search Console.
Thank you. Okay, and it's step 7. Once you have your conversion values, you're going to multiply them by the average order value to get your potential incremental revenue. And in the guide, you'll be able to see a further breakdown of this. This is just an overview of how we're going to calculate these values. Now you'll be able to create charts to look at your potential incremental traffic and revenue, and also make sure that you're comparing these numbers against your own goals to see if they're reasonable for your company. And finally, you'll divide the sum of the net returns per keyword by the cost of the work to get your annual projected ROI. So all that math will lead you to this right here. So how are we going to communicate these SEO projections? It's important that when we are communicating them to highlight that these numbers are not definite. And the best way to communicate your SEO projections is to make sure that everyone that's involved, your clients, they're educated on how we came up with these projections, how they're calculated, and what factors can affect, can get in the way of you achieving them. And clients love visualizations, or at least I do. So I think they're the best at showing off your projections and communicating all the moving parts that can impact your performance. And just moving on to how we're going to measure SEO performance. Passing back to you, Alex.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Genesee. And it's definitely a lot of numbers and definitely super useful. And like Genesee mentioned, there's probably more on this in the guide, but this is definitely all very, very important and very great to leverage when you're trying to calculate ROI or project ROI rather. Cool. And now, how do we measure SEO and performance? So, like I said, when all things are said and done, you can actually figure out what the ROI was and then compare it to the projected ROI. But imagine you're here now and you did all your SEO, a time has passed, and there should be an impact. How do we measure that impact? Well, the important questions to ask is what are we actually measuring? What is A/B testing, and how do we leverage that for measuring the performance? Also, it's good to remember the factors that affect SEO and that will affect our ROI and measurements. And lastly, how do we measure that ROI for SEO? That's going to bring it all together. Cool. Next slide. First of all, what are we measuring? And this really will depend on your business, but almost every time it'll be KPIs, so key performance indicators. So whatever you are trying to improve for your business is what you'll ultimately want to show improvements on through your measurement. So a KPI could be organic traffic, and oftentimes that's one of the KPIs because SEO work will probably have the most direct impact on organic traffic. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. I've worked with brands where one of the main KPIs was engagement. So they really wanted to improve their pages per session. They didn't so much care about improving the number of users that went to the site. They just tried to improve how well the users engaged with their content, because obviously it's easier to get somebody to who's already visiting your site to view an extra page than to get a brand new user to start visiting your site. Those people have to be sold on the whole process, on the brand. Someone who already likes you may potentially want to just get more of your content. So that was one of the KPIs that we're trying to improve with SEO. Next slide. And there's definitely an importance of A/B testing in the realm of SEO, especially when it comes to measuring ROI. A/B testing will not be the same kind of A/B testing that you're used to. So a lot of us, when we hear A/B testing, we're thinking of a product like an Optimizely, where the same user will just randomly be served a different page, and then after the test is over, you see that on average, which page performed better. With SEO, we can't really work with dynamic assets like that, because that's not how Google works. If a Google crawler visits your site, they can't see both pages, so it'll be one or the other. And I'll explain how we can get around this. Next slide. So one form of an A/B test, so to speak, is using date segmentation, comparing the same length of time before and after implementation. And this can be done a couple of ways. One way to do it is to take the same exact number of days in Google Analytics and compare that same number of days before the implementation took place. A lot of times you'll have to obviously get a good enough sample size. So if you just implemented something and you expect results within a few days, I really have bad news for you. That's probably not going to happen. So you definitely have to give it a few weeks at least, probably a few months, just to see that pattern continue. Another great way to do this very same tactic is doing year over year. So if seasonality plays a role for your business, year over year numbers will probably paint a better picture than doing before and after segments. Just because, for example, in April, maybe nobody buys whatever product you're selling, and May is when there's a giant spike. So that could potentially make it seem like the ROI on your SEO campaign was amazing. And then if you look at the year-over-year numbers, maybe it was still good, but not as great. So think of all the products that people buy once a year. Like if you're doing like this for a Christmas tree manufacturer, if you're comparing December to November, it's probably going to be very, very different numbers. Next slide. Another form of A/B testing, which you'll probably encounter a lot in the realm of SEO, is split testing. So when we're talking about split testing, when it comes to A/B testing. We're not really changing individual pages and serving different two different versions of the same page. We basically want to find templated content and then change part of it, change part of the whole, and see how that trends compared to the pages that weren't changed. So, for example, if you have an e-commerce site and you have 20 different products, but the template is the same for all of them. You have your description, a little picture, a little buy now, a little like buy in increments button. Everything's kind of the same, and you take half of those product pages and you decide to add some SEO copy. Well, not SEO copy, but rather copy to help the user that's also SEO minded and helps target more keywords. If we do this, we can basically compare apples to apples. If you had that copy added, you're the control group now. Did anything change? If you didn't have that copy added, did anything change there? So we can basically see if those adjustments actually had any kind of impact, and then we could control that for anything that happened in the world or the market. So if there was a big uptick in users going to your site, and that could potentially be amortized. I'm sorry, I'm misusing that word. Basically, be absorbed by the fact that we have a control group that also would have the same impact. So if there's a big increase in demand, we'd see that in both groups, and we could basically cancel it out and see the actual impact of that SEO change rather than the impact of the market itself. Next slide. Cool. And it's also very important to mention the fact that a lot of SEO will be bespoke. It will be customized. You won't just do one test, figure out the result, and basically call it a day. You ultimately want to continually test. So with date segmentation and the split testing, you want to test and see if something worked. And whether it did or not, you want to immediately think of the next thing to test. Ultimately, you want to be improving nonstop, because everyone who's competing with you is ultimately trying to do the same thing. Everybody wants to be the best. If you basically have a successful test and just end right there, you really will not last very long in any industry with that mindset. You ultimately want to figure out what works and then build on that. If it's an A/B test, split test that worked, are there any other templates where you could do the same thing on your site? Could you then expand this test to the whole entire templated content and see if it improves everything? A lot of times, successful tests don't necessarily mean that this success will be repeatable either. So you could have like a great test, the results are great, then you decide to go live with it on the whole site, and then it doesn't work. But if you aren't constantly testing, you probably wouldn't even find that out. So it's very important to always track your performance and constantly test things. Cool. Next slide. Another great quote. SEO is a marketing function for sure, but it needs to be baked into a product, not slapped on like icing after the cake is baked. So that's Dwayne Forrester. So ultimately, a lot of people try to take this approach like, oh, we need some SEO help, let us hire an agency, they'll fix it, and that's a done deal. So they do it for a year, and then they forget about it for the next 10 years. That's ultimately not the best approach, because you want to have a continual engagement of your SEO. You always want to improve. You always want to do the testing. You always want to be on the in the know of what's happening in the industry. There's a lot of changes that take place, as you all may already know, and all these changes can essentially impact your business. And if you're being reactive and it's taking you months, if not years, to realize that your traffic is suffering, then you're basically going to be behind the 8 ball at some point. So ultimately, it's not something you want to just fix once and forget about it. You want to constantly look for ways to improve your SEO. Next slide. And obviously, like I mentioned, there's a ton of factors that impact your SEO and the ROI of SEO and what's going to be affecting the measurements. There's been a ton of algorithm updates. Some of us who've been in the industry long enough probably remember the Panda, Penguin. Those were huge. Obviously, algorithm updates aren't going to be as drastic now because there's constant rollout of smaller tweaks. However, there are still big updates happening, not daily, but pretty frequently. One of the big ones coming up is the mobile index. Obviously, it's been pushed back a few times, but once we go into mobile only, you definitely want to be ready for that. That's going to be happening sometime in 2021, I believe. And obviously, the page speed algorithm update will also have a huge impact. So if you don't know about Core Web Vitals yet, definitely check it out. I actually have a blog post on Core Web Vitals and why it's going to be so important, and why page speed will be a very, very important factor moving forward, and why you should be preparing right now. So we actually have it up on our iPullRank blog. So after this, definitely check it out. Cool. Obviously, we're a lot of times when we do SEO, we look at just one thing we're trying to adjust. So it's like a meta title tag improvement, for example. There's so many factors that obviously this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we're actually working with. And all these things eventually result in your rank, in what kind of organic traffic you get. If you're improving one side of your SEO, there are 200 plus other things that could be changing and shifting at the same time. So it could be an algorithm update, for example, things you don't control, but it could also be things that are changing on your site. So someone who's working on a separate parallel project with your product could be inadvertently changing things. So for example, imagine you have a page with a ton of backlinks, and all of a sudden your marketing team decides, well, actually it's a page that no longer represents the brand. Let's just 404, let's remove it. We don't want anybody seeing this. You just lost a bunch of backlinks, and now whatever SEO you're testing has been impacted by your whole site's domain authority potentially has gone down. And now you're thinking, well, I did the right thing. Why did performance decrease? So it's very important to look at the bigger picture and also take into consideration that whatever you're working on is not going to happen in a vacuum. Things outside of your product, outside of your site are changing, and your site itself could be changing without you knowing about it. Next slide. And obviously, we want to go through a cycle of planning, setting up, collecting, analyzing, improving. It's going to be a never-ending process if you want to constantly improve. And it's extremely important to benchmark. So when I say benchmark, I mean you want to see where you are and to compare to later. So sort of like the date segmentation, the segment before the implementation acts as a benchmark. We could do the same thing pretty much with anything. So if you have a benchmark of monthly users or monthly visits, that could be something you use as a benchmark moving forward. So like, did our monthly users count increase for organic traffic? Obviously, it could go up or down, and then you want to see if it's trending up or down. And then you always want to create new benchmarks. So if the landscape changed and people just aren't as interested in whatever you have to offer, your benchmark could adjust as well. Perhaps it's not because your SEO efforts are bad. Perhaps it's just because demand went down. So something new came out and your product is slowly becoming obsolete. That benchmark is going to be slowly shifting. So comparing yourself to where you were, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe is not the best process. You might want to change that benchmark moving forward. Next slide. And obviously, I will always recommend using tools for this. GA is one of the best ones, and it's also free. So if you don't have GA right now, and I would hope that everybody viewing this webinar does, definitely register, create a profile, and begin tracking all the data that you have on your site. It's a somewhat simple process, and you definitely want to do this as soon as possible, just so you have all the data moving forward. There's a ton of different places where you could look. One of the best ones is to go under all traffic channels, organic search. This is where you'll see just strictly organic traffic. You'll look at users, new user sessions, things of that nature. And it will basically allow you to isolate your efforts strictly to organic. Next slide. Another free tool also from the Google Suite is Google Search Console. Once again, if you don't have it, the first thing you're doing after this webinar is creating a profile on Google Search Console. I recommend creating a few different ones just to isolate different sections of the site. It might be a little bit too more advanced, but definitely have as many profiles as you can to see how different parts of your site are tracking. Definitely have it for the main profile. And one of the best sections here to look is the search results under performance. You could definitely use different filters to check to change the dates. You can filter by query, filter by page. It provides similar data to what you see in Google Analytics, but it provides so much more than just GA. It provides a lot of technical issues as well. So sometimes your ROI will not necessarily be in the form of traffic. Sometimes if you're trying to fix things, your ROI might be, we went from, I don't know, 5,000 server errors to no server errors. This is how we measure the performance of our campaign. Obviously, this will later spell out result in improved organic traffic as well. But ultimately, if you're trying to show that your work actually amounted to something, that'll be a great place to look as well. Next slide. A great place to also look is keyword finder. So you can look at search volumes of all keywords. This will definitely work great with what Genesee talked about when we're trying to look at click-through rates and see how many eventual clicks you're going to get. So the search volume will give you a rough estimate of how many people are looking up that term. And then ultimately, should this term be even? Is this a term even you should even go after? And ultimately, before you even calculate or project ROI, you would want to look at the search volumes of the terms you're going for. So it's definitely a good place to start, especially if you're trying to do keyword research or in the beginning stages of content creation. Next slide. Another thing you want to measure is links. So Majestic is a great tool where you could see how you're performing on links, how specific pages are performing on links, but also how many total links you have. So if you have a campaign for SEO where you're just trying to improve your offsite performance and improve your domain authority, Majestic is a great place to look. This is not a free tool, but however, it is still great, so it might be worth the cost. Next slide. Another one that's also not free, unfortunately, but a great tool, Ahrefs. So very similar to Majestic. It does pull slightly different data. So if you have to pick one or the other, you might have to make that call, but ultimately it will provide very similar type of data where you'll see what kind of backlinks you're getting, see how you're trending on total backlinks. So if you have an outreach campaign or a PR campaign or just a great content campaign that's supposed to result in more links being built to your site, this is a good tool to use. And to pull it all together, you might want to consider using Google Data Studio. Just have everything in one single dashboard, so you could see these things and how they're trending over time. Especially if you're working on something, you want to see that performance. If not on a daily basis, at least on a weekly basis. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Alex. I'm going to take over from you.
Oh, thanks, Genesee. By the way, you're doing a great job with the slides. I know it's tough to know when I'm actually finished.
Thanks. All right, so we're going to go into how we're calculating ROI for SEO. So first, just looking here, we're going to look at reporting on SEO performance, showing SEO ROI, and calculating ROI for SEO. So we always want to establish a baseline before we do any work to measure future results. Like Alex was saying, we want to have that benchmark. So we always recommend establishing a baseline where you'll have a set of metrics to compare your results to. And we always recommend doing a site audit to find everything that your site needs to be worked on. So this will just lay out different areas of your site that need improvement on, and it'll organize into different categories that you'll be able to prioritize. And we always want to identify goals and objectives that meet your SEO efforts. So just always clearly identify your goals. That way you can measure them properly when you begin tracking your ROI improvements. And just having an SEO strategy based on goals and objectives that you've set. And that'll help you create a strategy that's most suited for your business goals. And when it comes to reporting on the SEO performance, you want to define deliverables and how they're going to be contributing to different areas of performance. So just having a layout of your methodology throughout the process is very important. So this moves on to creating a measurement plan. Here you'll be able to set up different things that you want to track, different channels and metrics that you want to include in your measurement. So you can include objectives, your KPIs, and different metrics such as transactions, revenue, new customers, all that good stuff. And you're going to always want to analyze your data and report your findings. So like Alex mentioned, we can create dashboards within GA. It can integrate all these different sources. And you always want to be tracking this throughout your ROI investment. So showing SEO ROI, just looking at this formula here, this ROI formula focuses on organic traffic over cost of investment, and you're more math here, just multiplying by 100 to get the performance of ROI on non-branded organic traffic. ROI is also going to help you increase your inbound links. So similar to the previous analysis that we looked at, just looking at inbound links, you can put a value on those links and analyze how much revenue you've gained through internal linking and external linking. And you always want to focus on increasing the quality of your traffic. So this formula here is focusing on incremental revenue due to a rise in AOV and conversion rate. And then you're always going to take into account the cost of your investment and multiply that by 100 to get a more catered formula. And if you're focusing on increasing your revenue, just an increase in organic revenue is a clear cut for top level executives. So this is extremely important for stakeholders to be held accountable to. So ROI is calculated by subtracting the initial value of the investment and dividing that by the total cost of your investment. So this is a standard formula, but as we saw in the previous slides, it can be more catered to the type of business that the type of ROI that you're looking to report on. And that's all, folks.
Sweet. Thanks, Genesee. So Genesee, we actually had a few questions come in. I didn't forget, and we brought them into this recording, so I'm going to try to answer them as well as I can. So the first question was, are there certain industries that are easy to calculate SEO ROI for? And if yes, can you elaborate on why? That's a great question. So the answer is yes. There definitely are industries where the ROI will be more clear-cut. So e-commerce specifically, you're looking at the bottom line a lot of times. So if your SEO efforts contributed to organic revenue growing, that's a very clear win. There are other industries where it's very lead oriented, or it's not even like it's not even revenue oriented. So there isn't really a way to track by the bottom line, and ultimately people who make like a large purchasing decision. For example, if somebody is trying to improve their SEO for the purchase of industrial-sized HVAC systems, someone's going to be doing a ton of research. So you could potentially prove your case by saying, well, we're going to improve your traffic, and your engagement on the site. But ultimately, these people may still want to have speak to a representative. And by that point, this in-person interaction isn't really tracked. So to answer your question briefly, is if there is tracking and if the purchases are not great, there is a low barrier of entry to the purchase, and those are pretty easy to track. Whereas if something is a grandiose decision to make, or there isn't really good tracking, and the end of the funnel will inevitably always involve a human touch point, that might be more difficult to track. Second question was, what is the biggest ROI proving aspect to a client to gain their trust? So if you're projecting ROI to begin with, you're probably already gaining their trust. So if you're an agency that just says, trust us, we do SEO, we have X years of experience, a lot of times it doesn't really resonate. So just giving projections to begin with and showing how you got to those projections, so things that Genesee was going through, is already gaining the trust to a degree. So doing that alone is great. Having a conservative estimate and not trying to promise people the world is also a great way to do it. So a lot of agencies, they just want to make that sale. They'll say like, well, we're going to improve your SEO 100%, whatever that SEO means to that client or prospect rather. And they don't really care what happens afterwards. That's definitely not going to win you any trust, because most likely this person's speaking to multiple agencies and multiple potential partners. And if someone else is trying to give like very conservative estimates and you just promise them the world, they usually does not instill a lot of trust in you. So give reasonable estimates and follow through on these estimates later and see how you actually performed. And honestly, because it's never going to be 100% accurate, nobody expects you to hit those marks 100% of the time. But give yourself some room to breathe. Don't overestimate, underdeliver, rather underestimate and say these are conservative values. We'd hope to get to go above and beyond that, but we can't promise that, nor do we want to project that yet. Cool. Next question is, how do you approach measuring the impact of specific SEO initiatives? For example, cleaning up duplicate content versus overarching SEO strategy. That's a great question. So obviously, the more you can boil it down to specific campaign, a specific initiative, rather than looking at the overall SEO strategy, the better. So if you work on specific pages and you can calculate ROI that's page specific, that's amazing. That's definitely something if you have the bandwidth to, you should be doing. So if you're improving 10 pages and you want to see how they perform, that's what you should be doing. Obviously, if you're just trying to improve your overall organic performance, you're going to look at like a total organic traffic, total organic revenue. And that's okay too if you're doing like a quarterly business review. Someone sitting in on a meeting like that may not necessarily be interested in how one page on their site performed, unless it's like the most important page in the site. So you have to know your audience and know what your bandwidth is. So if you have the capacity to review all the little details, that's definitely great. So if you cleaned up duplicate content, for example, that's what you were asking about. How do the pages that remained perform? Did you lose half the pages because they're duplicates, but also gain 100% in traffic for the pages that were no longer duplicates? Well, that's great ROI. Cool. What's a good ROI on SEO agency spend? So that sounds like someone who works in PPC asking that question. Yeah, so this is definitely not going to be a clear-cut answer for you right here. If you have a large site where the purchase cycle is months, perhaps even like a year, where someone has to make a very big life-changing decision, you could potentially not be able to measure that very well. You could say you could measure like the organic traffic improvements, but ultimately there isn't always going to be a way to measure ROI for SEO, and you have to be aware of this and upfront with the client. For smaller companies, this could be the complete opposite, where you know exactly which pages drive revenue. You have all your goals set up in Google Analytics. Everything's good to go, and you can have like amazing ROI, so like you're like 100% ROI because they didn't do any SEO before. It's a brand new site, and now they're growing tremendously. And on the other hand, like I mentioned, you can have an established site where the product takes a year to purchase. So there's not a clear-cut answer, unfortunately, for that, and it's going to be more of a custom approach depending on what kind of brand or company you're working with. Question here is, given the lack of accurate SEO data points, what kind of error margins should we account for? And again, this really will depend on how clear-cut this industry is. So if you have a very, very concrete understanding of how many people visit your site at every point of every month of every year, then you could potentially have a pretty low margin of error because you're basing things that are more of like in a vacuum. Whereas most companies, unfortunately, don't operate in a vacuum. There's definitely going to be a lot of impacts coming externally from Google algorithm changing, for example. And internally, you could have a complete brand rebuild. I'll give you a great example where I was working on with a client, and they saw year-over-year declines, even though they were spending on SEO. What they didn't account for was the year prior, they spent a ton of money on print ads, where people were just looking at these magazines, finding their product, and then going online to search for things. So in their mind, they thought, well, we paid for SEO, why aren't we getting it? But in reality, it's a piece of the puzzle. You can't just invest money and expect great results. If somewhere else you have a downfall, that also impacts SEO. If you have a huge PR nightmare, well, guess what? Maybe your traffic will go up because everybody's curious what's going on, but maybe your revenue will drop tremendously because nobody trusts you anymore. And that will also impact SEO. So margin of error, unfortunately, isn't going to be clear-cut. However, you can definitely narrow it down if you have a very predictable business. How do you forecast for seasonality? Oh, another great question. So forecasting for seasonality is a bit manual process, a bit more hands-on. So when we talk about search volumes, we're looking at monthly search volumes, and we obviously combine that with the click-through rates, and want to see how those click-through rates could improve. And then once you multiply everything together, you get like potential new traffic. What you want to do is look at monthly search volume over the course of a year, and if possible, even more than a year, and track back as far back as you can and see how that monthly search volume changes. So if you have a very seasonal product and you sell a boatload of it around Black Friday, that search volume will usually reflect that. So you'll see that, oh, we actually have 900 people who searched this term in November, but usually it's only 50 that search this term. So this is how you predict for seasonality. It's very basic, and obviously you can't necessarily predict what's going to happen in the future. Perhaps demand dropped, and now instead of 900 searches, you've got 700 searches. So obviously it's going to be margin of error there, but it's definitely a great way to show a client or a prospect that you understand that things aren't linear, and that you understand the product doesn't really necessarily have the same level of interest throughout the year. And we got a final question here. What baseline assumptions are incorporated into estimates, and how to make updates if an assumption is no longer true? Wow, a lot of great questions, guys. So thank you so much for submitting these. So for this question in particular, the baseline assumptions are that the sky's not going to fall. Google isn't going to throw everything out the window and just recreate everything. So we assume that there isn't going to be a major algorithm change in the time that we're predicting ROI for. Obviously, that isn't necessarily achievable because Google will make shifts all the time, and sometimes they'll make big shifts without making any kind of announcements beforehand. So if you want to adjust for that, you'll basically have to create a new benchmark at that point. So after the new change rolls out, given it just a little time to settle, because obviously once there's a big change, doesn't necessarily mean that the change is going to look exactly the same after a week of the change versus like 2 months of the change. So once we have that benchmark, the new benchmark, that's when we can use that benchmark to create new projections. But as far as assumptions go, we definitely want to assume that nothing critical is going to happen. I don't know, if the site migrates, for example, and we have a brand new site, that could potentially throw all of your projections out the window, because now they're no longer projections for the site that you have, or they're projections for the site you used to have. So things of that nature that are grandiose are assumed to not happen through the whole projection process. But if that does happen, you have to basically pivot and recalculate everything. Cool. Jency, do you have any questions for me?
Our SEO expert here. These were great questions. Thank you so much, Alex, for answering all of them.
Sweet.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to send this over to you, whoever signed up, and we're going to have this available for anyone else who wants to join us on this process.
Yeah, and there's a lot more information that this webinar actually was based on within the ROI ebook. So if you're interested in learning even more, definitely check that out. Definitely check out our blog. We have a ton of cool blog posts going up all the time, and there's a lot of good historic blog posts that are going to be of value. I referenced a few of them, I think, during this webinar, but definitely take a look at everything. Sweet. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Please tune into more of these webinars. We're always happy to have you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.